$2,400,000. That was the number on the settlement statement, and I was signing it away. The buyer's wife sat across from me on the back deck, initialing pages with a ballpoint pen that kept skipping because of the salt air. A conch shell I'd picked up on the beach 3 summers ago held the paperwork down against the wind. Her husband was inside photographing rooms with his phone. Her kids were on the beach stairs below us, shouting about crabs, their voices high and scattered, and full of the kind of energy that belongs to children discovering a place for the first time. She looked up between signatures. "This is the most beautiful house we looked at. How long did you live here?" "6 years. I set down the conch shell and straightened the pages. "But I built it for 9. She paused, pen hovering. "Isn't that the same thing?" "It isn't." She went back to signing. She didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't explain, because the answer would have taken longer than the closing, and involved a woman in Raleigh who treated my house like a family resource, and a brother who showed up with a U-Haul, and 3 children who weren't mine. The answer would have involved a phone call on a Sunday night in January, and a word I said that I didn't mean, and a word I should have said years earlier that I couldn't find until I was sitting on the hood of my car in the dark, on an empty beach in March, staring at a photograph of mold and ruin on my phone screen. But that was 5 months ago. Today, the paperwork was almost done, and the wire transfer would clear by 5, and the wind chimes I hung my first summer here were making a sound I would never hear again after this afternoon. Piper appeared at the deck door. She leaned against the frame and gave me the look. "The one that meant you, okay?" Without spending a syllable on it. I nodded, and she held up her phone. "Title company has everything. Wire clears by 5. I stood, took one last look at the view, the sound, the marsh grass bending south, the way the light hit the water at 11 in the morning and made everything look like a painting that someone was still finishing. 5 months earlier, this house was still the best thing I'd ever built. Or so I told myself. I was wrong. But I had to sell it to understand that. 5 months earlier. December 2025. My morning started at 6:45 with a load of linens in the back of my Subaru, driving north on the bypass toward Duck to swap sheets at a vacation rental I managed for an owner in Charlotte who never visited his own property. By 8:30, I was in Nag's Head, unlocking a $1.2 million listing for a couple from Richmond who asked me if the septic tank had ever backed up. By noon, I had answered 14 emails, confirmed 2 showings for Friday, and eaten a granola bar in my car because lunch was a concept I admired but rarely practiced. By 6, I was home, in the house that was mine and only mine. I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed listing photos on my laptop under the pendant light I wired during a thunderstorm in year 2 because the electrician I hired quit when he saw the junction box, and I couldn't afford a second. 1. The stain on the floor near the dishwasher was still there. Year 1. A pipe burst at 2 in the morning, and I fixed it with a YouTube tutorial, a crescent wrench, and a vocabulary of profanity that would have made my father blush if my father had been present, which he was not, because my father had never been present for anything that required effort or opinion. The kitchen was mine. Every surface, the subway tile I found at a salvage yard in Norfolk, driving back, with the seats folded down and the trunk lid tied shut with bungee cords. The butcher block countertop I sanded for 3 weekends straight until my palms were raw and the grain was smooth enough to run a hand across without catching. The spice rack I mounted because the wall was bare, and bare walls bothered me in a way I never fully examined, because examining it would have meant asking who I was building this kitchen for, and the answer to that question was a locked room I walked past every day. My phone buzzed. Mum. I picked up on the 3rd ring because picking up on the 1st looked eager, and picking up on the 5th invited a lecture about respect that lasted longer than the original reason for the call. Taylor, honey, how's the weather down there? Cold, windy. It's been rainy here all week. Your father can't get to the workshop, and he's driving me crazy. Listen, we'll come down for Christmas week. Derek and Megan too. The kids love the beach. That was Glenda. Statements dressed as announcements, dressed as plans you never agreed to but were now somehow committed to. I said fine. I always said fine. Fine was the word that kept the phone call under 5 minutes and the peace treaty intact for another month. After she hung up, I sat for a while, looking at the wall behind my monitor, a framed document. Dare County, State of North Carolina. Foreclosure auction, parcel number 4732, sold to Taylor L. Beckett. As sole purchaser, $680,000. The ink was starting to fade. I should get it reframed. I made a mental note, and then forgot it. The way you forget things that matter to you, but only in ways you can't explain to anyone else. I opened my texts. One from Piper Langston. Sold the whalebone listing. $1. Gade. M. Drinks? I smiled. One from Glenda, sent 2 minutes after our call. Can you pick up an air mattress for Derek's kids? The blow-up one popped last time. I did not smile. 2 texts. 2 different versions of who I was. Piper saw what I built. Glenda saw what I could provide. I closed the phone and went back to the listing photos. The pendant light buzzed above me, faint and familiar. The sound of a house that was still mine for now. The call came on a Sunday in January. And I should have seen it coming because Glenda's conversations had an architecture as predictable as the houses I sold. Small talk was the foundation. Sympathy for someone else was the frame. The ask was always the roof. And by the time she got there, you were already standing inside the structure she'd built around you. I was at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, comparing comps for a Monday listing presentation, a glass of wine sweating a ring onto the butcher block. The baseboard heater clicking in its rhythm. On and off. On and off. The sound of a house breathing in winter. Wind pressed against the windows, and the pendant light buzzed its familiar low note above me. My phone lit up on the counter. Glenda. I picked up on the 3rd ring. So, she said. After the weather in Raleigh and something about the neighbor's dog and a brief detour into the price of ground beef at Harris Teeter. Derek. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the phone. A habit. The body's way of bracing before the mind catches up. He lost the data point job. You know how the tech industry is. Megan's beside herself. 3 kids, and the severance runs out in 6 weeks. I waited. The heater clicked off. Silence filled the kitchen like water filling a bowl. Your father and I have been thinking. That phrase, your father and I, as if Vince had ever independently formed an opinion that Glenda hadn't planted, watered, and harvested first. You have all those bedrooms. 4 bedrooms and it's just you. Derek and Megan and the kids could use the space. Just until he's back on his feet. I set the wine glass down. How long? However long it takes. He's your brother, Taylor. It's my house, Mom. The edge came. It always did. Right at the moment you pushed back. Glenda's voice didn't get louder. It got thinner, like a blade being turned. It's a family. If you don't like it, you can stay in one of those rentals you manage. You have options, Taylor. Your brother doesn't. Vince's voice in the background, muffled, as if he was speaking from another room or another decade. Your mother thinks it's best. I stared at the pendant light. The one I wired during a storm because the electrician quit. The counter I sanded until my palms bled. The floor I fixed on my hands and knees at 2 a.m. with pipe sealant under my fingernails and a YouTube video paused on my phone. Glenda had just given my house to someone else. She hadn't offered it. She hadn't asked. She had distributed it. The way she distributed everything. According to a formula in which Derek's need was always greater and Taylor's contribution was always renewable. I scrolled my phone. Past the texts. Past Piper's congratulations on the whalebone sale. Past a photo I barely glanced at, but my thumb paused on for half a second. The house on the day of the auction, gutted and ruined. Mold climbing the studs and ply nailed over every window. I had typed day 1 under it 6 years ago and never deleted it. I could have screamed. I could have listed every board, every tile, every dollar, every hour. I could have said the word that had been sitting in my throat since I was 25 years old. The word that other daughters said to their mothers, without their hands shaking. Instead, I said, "Okay, Mom." The satisfaction in her voice was instant, like a door closing on the correct side. "I knew you'd understand. Derek will bring the kids down in February. Megan wants to know if the washer is the front load kind. It is. Good. She can't stand the top load. Okay. You're a good sister, Taylor." I hung up. Set the phone face down on the butcher block. Pressed both palms flat against the counter I built and held them there until the wood warmed under my skin. Then I opened my laptop. New email. Recipient, Piper Langston, Dune Crest Properties. Subject line, need to talk. Tomorrow morning. The pendant light flickered once, the way it always did when the wind hit the junction box. I didn't get up to fix it. For the first time in 6 years, I left something broken in this house on purpose. Piper's office was on the 2nd floor of a converted boathouse on the Nag's Head Causeway, and it smelled like old wood and printer toner and the ghost of whatever bourbon she'd poured the night before. Maps covered every wall. Listing printouts were pinned to a corkboard that had outgrown its frame and spilled onto the drywall with thumbtacks. A framed license hung crooked above her desk, and she had never straightened it in the 6 years I'd been coming here. I sat across from her on a Monday morning, 12 hours after the email. 2 gas station coffees between us, the kind that come in styrofoam cups with lids that never fit right. Mine was already lukewarm. Hers was untouched because Piper never drank coffee before she heard the pitch. "I need you to list my house," I said. "Which one?" "Mine." She set the cup down and looked at me across the desk. Piper Langston was 44 years old, owned her own brokerage, drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and had rebuilt her entire career after her ex-husband got the Virginia Beach house in the divorce. She was the only person in my life who had ever looked at a situation clearly and said the hard thing instead of the comfortable thing. "Taylor, your mother calls and tells you to hand over your house, and your answer is to sell it? My answer is to close before they move in. So fight. Pick up the phone. Tell her it's yours and she has zero authority to give it to anyone." I've never said that word to my mother, Piper. I don't know how that conversation ends, but I know exactly how a closing ends. I've done 200 of them. She leaned back in the chair. The bourbon bottle in her desk drawer caught the morning light through the window. The label she'd taped to it still said, "Client Therapy," in her handwriting. She looked at me the way she looked at a listing with foundation problems, like she was trying to decide whether the structure underneath was worth saving or if the whole thing needed to come down. "I had a cabin," she said, quieter now. "Blue Ridge. My grandfather built it. After my divorce, my mother gave it to my brother. Same speech yours gave you. He has kids, Piper. You don't need it." I said nothing, and I have driven past that turnoff every single time I go west for the last 9 years, and I look the other way because I can't stand to see his truck in the driveway. She opened her laptop. "I'll list it through Dune Crest. Your name stays off the MLS. We use the property address only. No Beckett anywhere in the listing. Showings by appointment, pre-approved or cash buyers only, and I handle every single one personally." She typed something, then looked up. "If your mother sees this listing before we're under contract, it's over. She'll call Derek. Derek will call you. And you'll say okay, because that's what you do. So we move fast, and we move quiet." "Understood? Understood." She picked up her coffee, took a sip, made a face. "Gas station on Route 12 still can't make a decent cup. They never could. And Taylor?" She pointed the styrofoam cup at me. "When this closes, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the word no. Because selling is a strategy. but it isn't the same as standing your ground. I didn't answer that. I wasn't ready to. 2 weeks later, I was staging my own house for showings. And the absurdity of that sentence still hadn't fully landed. I staged houses for a living. I arranged furniture and adjusted lighting and placed fresh towels in bathrooms I would never use. Now I was doing it to my own kitchen, my own bedroom, my own life, folding it into something presentable for strangers to walk through and evaluate. Piper's photographer was coming Thursday. I started with the guest bedrooms because they were the simplest. Fresh sheets, pillows arranged, curtains opened for natural light. The room looked like a catalogue spread. I moved to the closet to make sure it was empty. It was not empty. A plastic bin sat on the closet floor, shoved against the back wall, behind the folding luggage rack I kept for guests. Inside, 2 child-sized pool floats, a sand bucket with Beckett written across it in black Sharpie, and a half-eaten bag of goldfish crackers with the top twisted shut and held with a rubber band. I stood in the closet doorway with the bin in my hands. These were not from Christmas. I had cleaned every room on December 27th, stripped the sheets, vacuumed the closets, wiped the shelves. These items had been here before the holiday visit. They had been placed here during one of the weekends I was away at showings. The Saturdays I spent in Corolla or Duck or Southern Shores walking buyers through properties while Glenda walked her son's family through mine. I set the bin down and went to the kitchen. The pantry first. A box of Fruit Loops on the second shelf, behind the olive oil. I don't eat cereal. I have never eaten cereal in this house. The refrigerator. 4 juice boxes on the bottom shelf. The kind with the little plastic straws attached to the side. I didn't buy juice boxes. The junk drawer. I pulled it open and found, taped to the inside of the drawer face, a sticky note in Glenda's handwriting. The Wi-Fi password and the 4-digit code for the garage keypad. The ink had faded to a pale blue. This note had been here for months, possibly since summer. I closed the drawer slowly. The way you close something when you're trying not to slam it. The spare key. The one I gave Glenda 2 years ago, for emergencies, she said at the time. And I handed it over, because I always handed things over when she asked in that particular tone. The one that made generosity sound like a test of character. She had copied the key, or she had simply kept it and used it on her own schedule, letting Derek and Megan and the kids treat my home as a vacation property while I was across the island selling someone else's. I photographed everything. The bin with the pool floats, the Fruit Loops, the juice boxes, the sticky note in the drawer. I sent each photo to a folder on my laptop labeled Listing Prep, which was technically accurate and emotionally a lie. Then I put the Fruit Loops back on the shelf, closed the pantry, and left the sticky note where it was. I took out my phone and scrolled to the before photo. The house, 6 years ago, the day of the foreclosure auction, mold on studs, plywood over windows, the roof lines sagging where the hurricane had buckled the trusses. Day 1, I had typed underneath it, the house before me and the house after me. And now, apparently, the house during everyone else. I put the phone away and went back to staging. The photographer was coming Thursday. The floors needed to be perfect. 6 weeks on the market. 3 private showings. A retired couple from Raleigh who loved the view but couldn't get financing at their age. A developer from Atlanta who offered 1.8, and Piper rejected it before I even saw the paperwork. A single woman from DC who walked every room twice and said she needed to think about it and never called back. Then, a Saturday in late February, I was driving south on Route 12 after a listing appointment in Corolla. The 2-lane highway cutting through maritime forest. Live oaks draped with something between moss and memory, bare branches knitting together overhead. The Currituck Sound flickered through the trees on my left, grey and flat under a winter sky. The heater pushed dry air through the vents, and I had the radio off because I was running comps in my head the way other people hum songs. My phone rang through the car speakers. Piper's name on the display. I hit the green button on the steering wheel. Full ask, she said. 2.4. Cash offer from a couple in Northern Virginia. Tech money. Proof of funds verified. Inspection contingency only. They want to close in 60 days. I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires. A pickup truck passed me, doing 50, and the Subaru rocked in its wake. Say that again. $2,400,000. Cash offer. Full asking price. Taylor. This is real. $2,400,000. The number filled the car like a change in pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air goes dense and still. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. The leather was warm from the heater. When do they want to close? I asked. Late April. They want to be in before Memorial Day weekend. I did the math in the silence that followed. Late April was 60 days away. Derek was supposed to arrive in February, but Glenda had pushed it to March because Megan needed time to pack, and the kids were in the middle of a school trimester. March was 3 weeks away. Closing was 7 weeks after that. The window was tight. If Derek moved in before closing, I would have to disclose occupancy. Buyers don't want a family inside the house they're purchasing. Their agent would demand a credit, or worse, they would walk. What if someone is living in the house when we close? I asked. Piper paused. When she spoke again, the excitement was gone, and the broker was back. That would be a problem. If there's a non-owner occupant at the time of closing, we have to disclose. Buyers get nervous. Their attorney gets aggressive. Best case, they ask for a credit. Worst case, they pull the offer. There's no one in the house. And in March, there won't be. Taylor. I'll handle it, Piper. Another pause. I could hear her thinking through the phone, which is something Piper did audibly. A kind of half-breath that meant she was deciding whether to push or to trust. She trusted. I'll send the acceptance docs to your email. Sign tonight. I'll have it countersigned by morning. I signed on the shoulder of Route 12, parked between a guardrail and a stand of wax myrtles, tapping my finger on the phone screen, while a heron stood in the shallows 30 yards away and watched me with the disinterest of a creature that had never signed a contract in its life. 2.4 million. I built that number from a foreclosure nobody else bid on, from a down payment I scraped together over 3 years of Airbnb management and Friday night bar shifts at Howard's Pub and 7-day work weeks during peak season. I built it from YouTube tutorials and a retired contractor in Manteo who taught me to sweat copper pipe in exchange for lunch. I built it with hands that still had calluses I covered with clear nail polish before every open house. And now I was letting it go. The question Piper asked stayed in the car with me as I drove home. What if someone is living in the house? Derek was coming in March. Glenda had already told him the house was ready, the washer was front load, and his sister was fine with it. I drove to the house, parked in the driveway, walked through the front door, and stood in the living room. The late afternoon light came through the west-facing windows and turned the floor golden. The same floor I had sanded on my knees over a 3-day weekend in year 2, the one with the scar near the dishwasher from the pipe burst. I fixed at 2 in the morning. I touched the subway tile in the kitchen, ran my palm across the butcher block countertop that still held the faint wine ring from the night Glenda called. I traced the grout lines I had sealed twice because the first time I mixed the sealant wrong and had to strip it with a razor blade on a Saturday night while a podcast about true crime played on my phone. I looked up at the pendant light, still buzzing its low note, still flickering when the wind caught the junction box I should have replaced years ago. I was saying goodbye to a house that didn't yet know it was leaving me. Or maybe I was the one leaving. The distinction mattered, and I wasn't ready to examine why. I was standing in the master bedroom of a 3-bedroom Cape Cod in South Nag's Head, pointing at the crown moulding, and telling a couple from Norfolk about the original hardwood underneath the carpet when my phone vibrated in my blazer pocket. I ignored it. A second vibration followed, then a third, in quick succession. 3 in a row meant either Piper with an emergency or a family member with what they considered an emergency, which in the Beckett household could mean anything from a death in the family to Glenda running out of half and half. I excused myself with a smile and stepped onto the back deck. The couple continued into the bathroom. I could hear the wife opening the linen closet, the soft sound of a door on quiet hinges. 3 texts from Derek. The first: "Hey sis, coming down early. Megan found a preschool in KDH that has a spot opening March 15th. Can you believe it?" The second: "Mum gave me the garage code. We'll be there Saturday." The third: "Thanks for doing this. You're the best." Saturday was 5 days away. The closing was 7 weeks away. Derek was arriving 2 weeks earlier than Glenda's already revised timeline. And he was thanking me for a generosity I had never offered, because Glenda had offered it on my behalf, the same way she offered everything that belonged to me, with the cheerful confidence of a woman who had never been told the word that should have ended every one of these conversations before it started. I called him. He picked up on the first ring, because Derek always picked up on the first ring. He was the kind of person for whom phones existed as instruments of good news. "Taylor, did you get my texts?" "I got them." "Derek, I need you to wait." "Wait for what?" "Mom said the house was ready." "Mom doesn't get to decide when my house is ready." A pause. The particular silence of a man encountering a sentence he has never had to process. "She said you were fine with it," she told me. She didn't ask. There's a difference, and it matters. "Taylor, we already packed. The U-Haul is booked for Friday." The kids are excited. Lily's been telling her class she's moving to the beach. "Derek, don't come Saturday. Mum's going to be upset." "I know." I hung up and stood on the deck of someone else's listing and looked at the ocean through the gaps between houses. My hands were still. My chest was tight. I went back inside, smiled at the couple from Norfolk, and walked them through the walk-in closet and the annual property tax assessment and the proximity to the beach access at milepost 17. I answered every question with the calm, practiced cadence of a woman who sold houses for a living and was currently in the process of losing her own. 30 minutes later, sitting in my car in the driveway, with the engine running and the heater pushing warm air against my face, I listened to the voicemail, Glenda's voice. Full volume. The tone she used when she had already decided you were wrong, and the phone call was simply the sentencing hearing. "Taylor Ann Beckett, your brother has 3 children and you are telling him to wait? After everything we've done for you? After I spent 2 weeks finding a preschool with an opening? What is wrong with you, Taylor? Call me back immediately." I did not call her back. I set the phone on the passenger seat, face down the way I had done on the butcher block counter the night of the first call, and I drove to Piper's office, because Piper's office was the only place on the island where someone would look at this situation and see it for what it actually was. I woke at 6 the following Saturday and drove to the house, even though I had told myself not to. Some part of me needed to see it. The way you press on a bruise to confirm it still hurts. The U-Haul was already in the driveway. Orange side panels bright against the grey morning like a wound on the landscape. The front door was open. Derek walked out carrying a box, and I watched him cross the threshold of the door I had hung myself on a Sunday afternoon in year 3, when the original frame rotted through and I spent 4 hours shimming and planing until the swing was right. He carried the box with both hands and walked it through the door as if the door had always been there, as if doors simply existed and no one in particular had measured and cut and sanded them into the frames they sat in. Children's voices came from inside, high and scattered. The sound of kids running through rooms, discovering closets and stairways, and windows with views they hadn't seen before. Derek's 3, 7, 5, and 2. The 2-year-old would have been carried. Glenda's sedan was parked behind the U-Haul. She had driven 3 hours from Raleigh. Of course she had. She would want to oversee the installation the way she oversaw everything. standing in the center of a room giving directions to people who were doing the actual work. I sat in my car across the street, with the engine running and the heater on, and my hands on the steering wheel, and I watched my family move into my house the way you watch a car accident from the sidewalk, with the particular horror of someone who can see every detail and change none of them. I did not go inside. I drove to Piper's office on the causeway and sat in the parking lot until I saw her truck pull in at 8:30. She was carrying 2 coffees. She saw my face through the windshield and stopped walking. Inside, she was already on the phone before I could sit down. She hung up, set the phone on the desk between us, next to the bourbon bottle with the client therapy label and the crooked license frame she had never straightened. "The buyer's agent called me at 7 this morning," she said. "Someone named Megan Beckett posted an Instagram story from the property. 3 stories, the kitchen, the back deck, and the kids in the guest bedroom. Caption: New beginnings, in our beach house. Heart emoji. Wave emoji. The kitchen I tiled. The deck I sealed. The guest bedroom where I found the Fruit Loops and the sand bucket with Beckett written in Sharpie and the sticky note with my Wi-Fi password in Glenda's handwriting. She tagged the location?" I asked. "Geotagged. Kill Devil Hills." The buyer's agent recognized the subway tile from the listing photos. The subway tile. The tile I drove to Norfolk for. The tile I loaded into my Subaru with the seats folded down and the trunk tied shut with bungee cords. A stranger's wife identified my house on Instagram because of tile I chose at a salvage yard 4 years ago. And that identification might now cost me the sale. Piper folded her hands on the desk. "Buyers want to know if there's a family living in the property. The occupancy disclosure in our paperwork says the home is owner-occupied. No additional occupants. As of this morning, that's no longer accurate. Their agent is asking for either full disclosure with a closing credit of $150,000 or they walk $150,000. They're spooked, Taylor. Buying a house is already terrifying. Buying a house with an unplanned family inside it is a deal killer. Their agent knows that, and he's using it. They aren't tenants. They've been there 12 hours. Doesn't matter what they are. Matters what the buyers feel. And right now the buyers feel like they're purchasing a family dispute along with the property. $150,000. I did the math the way I always did the math. Automatically. The way my brain converted every problem into numbers, because numbers were clean, and Glenda was not. $150,000 was the price of the Sunday night phone call. The price of your mother thinks it's best. The price of Megan's Instagram caption and the heart emoji and the wave emoji and the word "our" applied to a beach house she had never paid $1 toward, never lifted a board for, never sanded or wired or tiled or fixed at 2 a.m. with pipe sealant under her fingernails. Then the group text arrived. Aunt Robin, Cousin Jessie, Uncle Paul, Glenda's sister Deb, 12 people in a thread I hadn't been added to but was now being forwarded by Cousin Jessie, who had always been the family's most reliable source of second-hand information. Glenda's message at the top. Please pray for Taylor. She's going through something and I don't know what. She told Derek's children they can't stay at her empty beach house. I've tried calling but she won't pick up. I don't know what's happened to her but I'm worried. I read it twice. The architecture was flawless. Glenda wasn't attacking me. She was concerned about me. She wasn't angry. She was worried. She hadn't been told no. She had been met with a daughter who was clearly unwell. And she was asking the family to rally around the shared project of being concerned about poor Taylor, who was going through something, the nature of which Glenda couldn't possibly explain, because Glenda was just a loving mother trying to help her son's family, and her daughter had inexplicably turned hostile. 17 messages and counting. Aunt Robin, praying for you, sweetie. Uncle Paul, family's family. Cousin Jessie, is she okay? Should someone drive down there? Piper read over my shoulder. She had come around the desk and was standing behind my chair, and I could smell the coffee she hadn't touched, and the faint bourbon that lived in the walls of this office the way salt lived in the walls of my house. "Your mother," Piper said, quiet and precise, "is a piece of work." I stared at the screen. The messages kept coming, each one a small vote of confidence in Glenda's version of reality, each one a brick in the wall she was building around me. And not one of them had asked for my side, because in Glenda's family, there was only one side. There was Glenda's story. And then there was the silence of everyone who had learned that challenging it cost more than accepting it. I had a $2.4 million house with a full-price cash offer. I had a plan, I had a timeline. And my mother had undone all of it with a 3-hour drive from Raleigh and an Instagram story she probably helped Megan caption. I drove south, past the Dunecrest office on the Causeway, past the rental property in South Nags Head, where I had swapped linens that morning, 6 weeks ago, back when the worst problem in my life was a box of Fruit Loops in my pantry, past Howard's pub where I worked Friday nights and the bartenders called me Bex and poured my shift drink without asking, past the last cluster of houses where the island narrowed and the road ran between the ocean and the Sound with nothing on either side but sand and sky. Coquina Beach. Off-season. The parking lot was empty, except for a Dare County maintenance truck that had been parked there so long the tires had sunk into the sand. I pulled in, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. March on the Outer Banks is cold in a way that tourists never see. The wind comes off the Atlantic without anything between it and the open ocean. And it finds every gap in your jacket and every crack in your resolve. I got out of the car and sat on the hood because I needed the cold. I needed something outside of me that was real and physical and indifferent to the $150,000 and the 17 text messages and the orange U-Haul in the driveway of the house I built. Sand blew across the parking lot in thin ribbons, white against the dark asphalt. The ocean was invisible beyond the dune line, but I could hear it. The constant shushing sound that had been the last thing I heard every night for 6 years. Lying in the bedroom I painted myself, on a bed I assembled myself. In a house I rebuilt from ruin, I took out my phone. The screen was the only light, casting my face blue-white against the darkness. I scrolled past the group text, past Aunt Robin's prayers and Uncle Paul's platitudes, past Cousin Jessie's concern that was really just curiosity, past all of it. I scrolled until I found the photo, the before photo. The house on day one in all its gutted ruin, mold darkening the studs in patterns that looked like maps of places no one should visit. The subfloor rotted through to the joists in the master bedroom, the roof sagging on the south side where Hurricane Dorian had buckled the trusses. And no one had fixed them because no one had cared enough to fix them. Plywood nailed over every window. The real estate agent who handled the foreclosure auction told me, while I stood in the county courthouse with paddle number 47 in my hand, "You know this is a teardown, right?" I didn't tear it down. I sisted every stud that could be saved. I replaced the ones that couldn't. I braced the joists with lumber I drove to Elizabeth City to pick up because the Nags Head hardware store didn't stock the length I needed. I ran electrical wire through the walls using a fish tape I borrowed from a retired contractor in Manteo. The same man who taught me to sweat copper pipe in exchange for a turkey sandwich and a Dr. Pepper. I tiled the kitchen on my hands and knees following a YouTube video. I paused and replayed so many times the presenter's voice became a kind of background music to my life. I hung drywall by watching a crew I hired for the living room, and then doing the bedrooms myself. Slower and less even, but mine. And when it was finished, when the last coat of paint dried on the trim and the deck rails were sealed and the pendant light was wired and buzzing its low note, and the kitchen was done, and the sunlight hit the water through the windows, I chose at a surplus store in 79, Chesapeake. I took a photo, sent it to Glenda, captioned it. All done. Her response came 40 minutes later. 2 words and a question mark. Cute. Is that granite? I sat on the hood of my car in the dark at Coquina Beach and stared at the before photo, and the truth came in the way the tide comes in on this stretch of coast. Gradually, without announcement, just water rising around your feet until you look down and realize you're standing in it. I didn't build this house for me. I built it for Glenda. Every dollar I saved across 3 jobs and 9 years and weekends I never took. Every board I nailed and tile I laid and wire I ran, I was building a counter-argument, a rebuttal in wood and granite and subway tile, and a pendant light that buzzed because the junction box wasn't perfect, but it worked. It worked because I made it work. And that should have been enough. I was constructing the physical proof that I was worth something. Addressed to a woman who told me, "You picked him the night my marriage ended," and hung up the phone. 9 years of evidence. 9 years of testimony, delivered to an empty courtroom because the judge never showed up. Glenda drove 3 hours to install Derek in my house, and she never once walked through the rooms I built and said the words I'd been earning since I was 25 years old. She never looked at the tile, or the counter, or the deck, or the view and said, "You did this. My daughter did this." She said, "Is that granite?" The house was never a home. It was an exhibit, and the jury had already left the building. I could keep it. Keep polishing the evidence. Keep adding rooms to a case that would never be heard. Keep building for a woman who would always look past the cathedral and ask about the granite. Or I could let it go. Sell the exhibit. Close the case. Walk out of the courtroom I'd built and into something that wasn't a performance. Selling wasn't revenge. Selling wasn't loss. Selling was the first decision I had ever made about this house that had nothing to do with Glenda Beckett. The first thing since paddle number 47 in the Dare County Courthouse that was mine for no reason other than it was mine. I closed the photo. Opened Piper's contact. Typed with thumbs that were stiff from the cold. Don't take the credit. Don't reduce the price. Full terms. And I'll get them out. I put the phone in my pocket. The ocean was still there behind the dunes, invisible but constant, making the sound it makes whether anyone is listening or not. I sat with that for a while, the sound of something that exists without needing to prove it. It was late and the wind was sharp, and I was sitting on the hood of my car in an empty parking lot on a barrier island in March, and for the first time in 9 years I wasn't building anything. I was just sitting, and that, somehow, was enough. I slept in the parking lot of Piper's office that night, reclined in the driver's seat with my jacket balled under my head and the heater cycling on and off because I didn't trust the battery to run it all night. I woke at 6:15 with a stiff neck and sand in my shoes from Coquina Beach and the kind of clarity that only arrives after you've spent an evening on the hood of your car staring at a photograph of the worst thing you ever bought and understanding, finally, why you bought it. Piper's truck pulled in at 7. She saw my car. She didn't ask why I was there. She unlocked the office, started the coffee maker, and set a clean towel on the bathroom counter without a word. I showered in the small bathroom behind the filing cabinets, the one with the window that looked out over the causeway and the sound beyond it, grey and flat in the early light. By 7:30, I was sitting at her desk with wet hair and a plan. "Locksmith first," I said. "Every door, garage keypad reset. I want new keys by noon." Piper opened her laptop. "I know a guy in Kitty Hawk. He can be there by 9. Second. I need to write a formal notice for Derek. He's a guest on my property with no lease, no rent agreement, and less than a month of occupancy. Under North Carolina law, he has no tenant protections. I'm revoking permission for him to remain and giving him 7 days to vacate. And if he doesn't, then I call the Dare County Sheriff and report a trespasser. But he will. Derek has never stayed anywhere he wasn't invited. He just didn't understand that he was never invited here. Third, I call the buyer's agent myself. Agent to agent. I tell her the occupancy situation will be resolved within 10 days. The property will be vacant and broom clean at closing. And I'll put that in writing as a seller's addendum to the contract. Piper leaned back. The bourbon bottle with the client therapy label caught the light. You're not offering the credit. The $150,000. I am not giving my mother's tantrum a $150,000 price tag. The deal is full price and full terms. Or the buyers can find another beachfront property in Kill Devil Hills that someone built from a foreclosure with their own hands. They won't, because there isn't one. She picked up her phone and called the locksmith. By noon, the locks were changed. $225 for the deadbolts, the knob sets, and the garage keypad reprogramming. I counted the receipt. 9 years of Glenda's spare key and all those unauthorized weekends with the Fruit Loops and the sand bucket and the sticky note in the junk drawer, and the whole thing cost less than a single mortgage payment. Piper drove me to the house. The locksmith's van was pulling away as we arrived. Derek answered the front door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, coffee in his hand, the confused expression of a man who had just discovered that his key no longer worked and had been waiting on the porch for someone to explain why. I handed him the notice. One typed page. Clear and direct. He read it standing in the doorway of the house I built, and I watched his face travel from confusion to disbelief to something that sat between alarm and the slow recognition that the ground beneath him had shifted. You're serious, he said. I've been serious for 9 years, Derek. You just never asked. 4 days later, I used my new key on my new lock and walked into the kitchen. Derek was at the table, the reclaimed wood table I built from barn planks I drove to Manteo to pick up. The ones I sanded in the garage over a weekend in year 3 until the grain was smooth enough to set a plate on without it wobbling. His mail was spread across the surface. Amazon packages stacked against the wall. A coffee pot I didn't own sat on the counter next to the butcher block. And the coffee inside it was a brand I'd never bought. The smell of it, foreign in a kitchen where every other smell was mine. Boxes stood half-packed along the far wall. The living room, visible through the doorway, was cluttered with bins and suitcases, and the plastic pool floats from the guest bedroom closet, the same ones I'd photographed weeks ago when I was staging the house for showings, and found the evidence that Glenda had been running a parallel life inside my walls. Glenda sat at the end of the table. She had driven down from Raleigh the day she heard about the notice. 3 hours on I-40 and Route 64, the same drive she made to install Derek, and the same drive she never once made, just to see what I'd built. Her perfume reached me before her voice did. The same scent she'd worn since I was 12. Floral and sharp, the smell of every holiday dinner and every phone call, and every time she said, "Your father and I have been thinking," before announcing a decision that was already made. Vince sat in a chair by the window. His hands were folded in his lap. He did not look at me. He would not speak. He was doing what Vince always did, which was occupy a room without occupying the conversation. A man who had spent 35 years outsourcing his conscience to his wife and collecting the peace that came with never having to disagree. Megan was upstairs with the kids. I could hear the 2-year-old crying about something, and the 5-year-old telling him to stop. "Taylor," Glenda said. "This is absurd. You're evicting your own brother. He's a guest I didn't invite, Mum. And this house is under contract." "Under what?" "Under contract. I sold it. Closing is in 5 weeks." The pendant light buzzed above us. It flickered the way it always did when the wind caught the junction box. And the wind was catching it now, and the light pulsed once like a heartbeat in a room that had gone very still. "You sold it," Glenda said. The words came out flat, as if she were testing them for weight. "Without telling us, it's mine to sell. This is a family home." I walked to the office wall. The framed document was still there, behind the monitor, where it had hung since the week I closed on the property. I lifted it off the hook and carried it back to the kitchen and held it up in front of Glenda so she could read every word. Dare County, State of North Carolina, foreclosure auction, Parcel number 4732. Sold to Taylor L. Beckett as sole purchaser for $680,000. Show me, Mum. Show me where your name is on this. Show me where Dad's name is. Show me where it says Derek. Show me the line that says family home. Glenda stared at the document. Her reading glasses were on the beaded chain around her neck, and she did not put them on. She did not need to read it. She could see her daughter's name, and she could see the absence of her own, and that was all the reading this moment required. "We are your parents," she said. "We don't need our names on a piece of paper to make decisions for this family. You didn't make a decision for this family. You made a decision about my property without asking me. That's not family, Mum. That's a landlord who doesn't pay rent, Derek." Quiet from the end of the table where he'd been sitting with his hands around a coffee mug. "Mum said you'd share." I turned to him, took out my phone, opened the before photo, and held it so he could see the screen. "This is what I bought, Derek. Mold on the studs, floor rotted through, roof caving in. Everything you see in this house, the kitchen, the deck, the bathrooms, the tile, the light above your head. I built it. 3 jobs for 9 years. You are sitting at a table I made from wood I drove to Manteo to pick up. Did Mum tell you that part?" He looked at the photo. He looked at the table. He ran his hand across the surface, slowly, the way you touch something when you're just discovering it's real. Something moved behind his eyes. It wasn't an apology. It was closer to the first moment of understanding that the math had never been what Glenda told him it was, that the equation in which Taylor was the variable that could always absorb more had a denominator his mother never showed him. "After everything I've done for you," Glenda started. "What?" I said. "What have you done for me?" I gave her time. I stood in the kitchen, I tiled. On the floor I sanded. Under the light I wired. Surrounded by the subway tile I chose at a salvage yard in Norfolk, and I gave Glenda Beckett all the time in the world to answer the question. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. Her lips moved around the shape of a word that didn't come. The silence filled the kitchen the way the tide had filled the space around my feet at Coquina Beach that Saturday night. Gradually, completely, until everything that wasn't the silence had been submerged. "You have 5 days," I said. "The buyers take possession on the 6th. I would appreciate it if the house were clean." I walked out through the door I hung in year 3, past the deck rails I sealed in year 4, down the stairs I replaced in year 5. I did not turn around. Behind me, the pendant light buzzed once more. Faint and steady. The sound of something I made that would go on working after I left. 6 days later, I parked across the street and watched. The U-Haul was back. Same orange panels, same garish brightness against the morning. Derek carried boxes down the front steps. Megan loaded the minivan. The kids were already buckled in. The 7-year-old with a tablet, and the 5-year-old with a juice box, and the 2-year-old asleep in the car seat with his head tilted sideways. Glenda stood on the porch with her arms crossed. She was not carrying anything. She was not helping. She was watching, the way she had always watched. Presiding over events she had set in motion and refusing to participate in the labor they required. Derek closed the U-Haul's rear door and locked it. He wiped his hands on his jeans and turned toward his truck, and then he saw my car. Stood there for a moment, his hands at his sides, looking across the street at me, the way you look at someone you are seeing for the first time even though you have known them your entire life. He crossed the street. I rolled down the window. "You really built all that?" he said. "The kitchen, and the table, and the deck? All of it? All of it." "I didn't know, Taylor. You didn't ask." He stood there with his hands in his pockets, and the wind coming off the sound, and the morning light hitting the house behind him. "The house I built. The house that was about to belong to someone else." He nodded. It was a small movement. Barely enough to see, but it carried the weight of a man standing inside a correction he couldn't undo. He had received something he never earned. His sister had earned something she never received. The nod was the first honest accounting between us in 34 years. "Mum shouldn't have done that," he said. "She shouldn't have. I'm sorry I didn't." He trailed off, looked at the ground. "I just did what she said. I always did what she said." "I know. That's the problem, Derek. For both of us." He walked back to his truck. Glenda called something from the porch, her voice thin against the wind. And Derek did not answer. He got in and pulled away, and the U-Haul followed him. A slow orange rectangle turning left at the end of the street and disappearing behind the dune line. Glenda stood alone on the porch of a house that was not hers, had never been hers. Watching the last vehicle leave, I could see her from across the street. A woman in a pastel blouse with her arms crossed and her reading glasses on the beaded chain and nothing left to manage. She stood there for a long time, then she went inside to get her purse and her keys and drove back to Raleigh, and I sat in my car and watched her go. Late April, and we were back on the deck with the paperwork spread across the table. The conch shell I'd picked up on the beach 3 summers ago, holding down the pages against the wind. We were back where this story started. Except now, the distance between the beginning and the end wasn't 5 months. It was 9 years and 3 jobs, and a foreclosure auction, and a pendant light wired during a storm, and a phone call on a Sunday night, and a photograph of mold and ruin, and an empty kitchen where I asked my mother what she had done for me, and the silence that answered. The buyer's wife signed the last page. Her husband was inside photographing the rooms. Their kids were on the beach stairs, the same stairs I replaced in year 5, shouting about crabs again, their voices high and bright, and belonging to a family that would fill this house with a kind of living that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. The wire transfer cleared by $2,400,000. After the mortgage, the closing costs, and the commissions, I walked away with $1.83 million. The number was large and clean, and it sat in my bank account like a sentence I had finally finished writing. But the number was never the point. I had spent 9 years believing the house was the point, ever since the night my marriage ended, and I called Glenda from a rented room above a bait shop, and she said, "You picked him," and hung up the phone. Every dollar after that. Every board. Every tile. Every Friday night behind the bar at Howard's, I was answering that phone call. I was standing in the Dare County Courthouse with paddle number 47 in my shaking hand and bidding on a counter-argument made of wood and granite and 9 years of labor addressed to a woman who would never read it. The freedom wasn't the money. The freedom started at Coquina Beach in the dark in March, staring at a photo of the worst house on the Outer Banks, and understanding that I had rebuilt it into the best house on the Outer Banks, and the woman I built it for looked at every room and said, "Cute. Is that granite?" Piper came out after the buyers went inside. She carried 2 glasses and the bourbon bottle from her desk, the one with the client therapy label, and she poured without asking because Piper never asked when she already had the answer. "So," she said. "What now?" I looked at the sound one more time. The light on the water, the marsh grass bending south, the wind chime I forgot to take down, still turning in the breeze, making a sound like small bells at the edge of the world. "Something small," I said, "inland and quiet, something that's just mine, to prove something, to live in, just to live in." She raised her glass. I raised mine. The bourbon was warm and the afternoon was fading, and somewhere behind us the buyers' kids were already calling the beach stairs theirs, and that was fine. That was exactly right. I drove south on Route 12, past the listing office and the rentals and Howard's pub, past all the landmarks of a life I had built on a barrier island between the ocean and the Sound, then west on 64, over the bridge. The Wright Memorial rose on the left and fell behind. The Outer Banks shrank in the rear-view mirror, the bridge narrowing to a line, and the line narrowing to nothing. And the mainland opened up ahead of me, wide and green and ordinary and mine. The before photo was still on my phone. I didn't delete it, and I didn't need to. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was just a picture of a house I used to own. A house that taught me something it took 9 years to learn. The best thing I ever built wasn't the house. It was the woman who drove away from it, westbound, windows down, with nothing to prove and nowhere to be, and the whole interior of the country ahead of her, quiet and open and unbuilt.